Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a historical figure who is practically a walking contradiction. We're talking about a man whose very name is basically synonymous with the Golden Age of Florence. This was a leader who stabilized the chaotic political landscape across the entire Italian peninsula, and a visionary who fundamentally shaped the Italian Renaissance as we know it today. We are talking, of course, about Lorenzo de Medici, the true architect of an era. Now, what's really interesting about this is the incredible contrast between his legendary, larger-than-life historical reputation and his actual physical reality. He held the grand, sweeping title of the Magnificent and was the immensely powerful de facto ruler of the Florentine Republic. But honestly, he wasn't exactly what you'd picture when you think of a Renaissance golden boy. Historical accounts describe him as rather homely. He had a broad frame, short legs, a squashed nose, short-sighted eyes, and a pretty harsh voice. In fact, the traditional dashing hero persona belonged to his famously handsome brother Giuliano.
Part 1. The Making of a Ruler. The Boy Groomed for Power. From day one, Lorenzo was considered the absolute most promising of the 5 kids in his family. He was meticulously educated to lead, trained in Greek, and tutored by seasoned diplomats and the famous humanist philosopher Marsilio Ficino. His close friend Niccolò Valleri captured his essence perfectly, writing, "Nature had been a stepmother to him in regards to his personal appearance, although she had acted as a loving mother in all things concocted with the mind." And that's exactly it. His immense power and undeniable dignity sprang entirely from this remarkable intellect, which commanded deep respect from absolutely everyone around him.
And that sharp intellect was tested super early. At just 20 years old, and remarkably right after winning a major jousting tournament through pure skill and valor, Lorenzo had to step up and assume absolute power following the sudden death of his father in 1469. But here's the catch. Lorenzo didn't sit on a traditional throne. Instead, he maintained his dominance through this incredibly intricate web of indirect rule. It was like a giant puzzle. He governed through surrogates in the city councils, used highly strategic payoffs, and arranged political marriages to keep an iron grip on the republic. But, as you might guess, this kind of indirect, overarching control inevitably bred some deep, dangerous resentments among rival Florentine families who felt entirely locked out of their own government.
Part 2. Blood in the Cathedral, the Pazzi Conspiracy.
Picture this. It's Sunday morning, April 26, 1478. The Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore. Suddenly, a rival group led by the Pazzi family and Archbishop Salviati strikes in a violent, completely unexpected coup. Mid-attack, absolute chaos erupts. Lorenzo's brother, Giuliano, is brutally stabbed to death. Lorenzo fights back. Defended by a poet and a banker, he barely escapes, surviving with just a minor wound to his neck. And the aftermath? Swift and bloody. The Florentine populace rises up in a total rage, brutally lynching the conspirators, and even hanging the archbishop himself in the streets.
So the immediate conspiracy failed, but man, the geopolitical fallout was massive. These aggressors weren't just local rivals. Archbishop Salviati had acted with the direct blessing of Pope Sixtus IV. This ignited a terrifying geopolitical tightrope. The Pope completely excommunicated Lorenzo and then formed a military alliance with King Ferdinand I of Naples. Suddenly, Florence, backed only loosely by Milan and Bologna, found itself plunged into an existential war against the Holy See and Naples. The war drags on, and Florence's allies offer basically zero actual support. The situation is looking incredibly dire. Then, Lorenzo makes a wildly audacious move. He travels to Naples personally to face his enemy, King Ferdinand. He effectively becomes a prisoner of the king for several months, risking his own life right in the lion's den. Think about that for a second. It would be like a modern head of state walking unarmed directly into an enemy capital. So the crucial point is, through sheer charisma and masterful diplomacy, he somehow manages to resolve the crisis and secure peace. And this massive gamble didn't just save Florence. It actually let Lorenzo secure constitutional changes back home that enhanced his own absolute power even further. Part 3. Funding the Renaissance and buying soft power. With his borders finally secured, Lorenzo pivoted to a totally different kind of warfare. Culture. And the legendary orbit of individuals within his court is frankly staggering. Sandro Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, Domenico Ghirlandaio, Marsilio Ficino, Michelangelo literally lived with the Medici family for 3 years, dining right at Lorenzo's table. It's a completely overwhelming list of sheer genius.
Now, Lorenzo didn't necessarily commission all their work himself, but he helped these masters secure monumental commissions from other patrons, cementing Florence as the undisputed center of the 15th century Renaissance.
But, as you might expect, achieving this level of cultural dominance certainly didn't come cheap. 663,000. That is the number of florins Lorenzo calculated his family had spent on charity, buildings, and taxes between 1434 and 1471. To put that staggering number into perspective for us today, that's roughly equivalent to 460 million US dollars. And this brilliantly illustrates his mindset. He knew exactly what he was doing. Lorenzo wrote, "I do not regret this, for though many would consider it better to have a part of that sum in their purse, I consider it to have been a great honor to our state, and I think the money was well expended and I am well pleased." His patronage was essentially the 15th century version of the ultimate public relations campaign. It was a highly calculated investment in statecraft, diplomacy, and an enduring public image. Part 4. The price of power, the gray area of ruling. Now, maintaining that flawless public image and absolute power was never entirely clean. To understand one of his major historical controversies, we first need to talk about alum. Alum was a highly valuable natural commodity, absolutely essential for the 15th century glassmaking, tanning, and textile industries. When local citizens discovered alum sources in the town of Volterra, they naturally wanted those massive revenues for their own municipal funds, right? They didn't want to see them siphoned off into the pockets of their Florentine financial backers. And this economic dispute sparked an insurrection and a full-blown secession from Florence.
Which brings us directly to the sack of Volterra. To suppress this local secession over the alum mines, Lorenzo sent mercenaries to put down the revolt by force. Those mercenaries ultimately and brutally sacked the city. The historical record notes that while Lorenzo hurried to Volterra to try and make amends afterward, the damage was completely irreversible. Neutrally speaking, the incident remains a dark, undeniable stain on his political legacy.
And behind the scenes, the legendary Medici wealth was drying up beneath his feet. The Medici Bank was draining rapidly during Lorenzo's lifetime. Plagued by bad loans, the incredibly heavy expenses of wars, and overall financial mismanagement, Lorenzo was eventually forced into some deeply ethically compromised financial decisions. He actually resorted to misappropriating trust and state funds simply to keep his state and his family's dominant position afloat.
Part 5. Fall of the Dynasty, a crumbled empire.
Towards the end of his life, a radical preacher named Girolamo Savonarola began gaining massive influence in the city. He was pushing back fiercely against the very Greco-Roman culture that Lorenzo had so carefully championed. The immense pressure of financial crises, physical illness, and these shifting cultural tides really took their toll. On April 8, 1492, Lorenzo died at the family's Careggi villa. He was only 43 years old. Savonarola himself actually visited Lorenzo on his deathbed. Now, while witnesses reported Lorenzo passed peacefully, it was a deeply superstitious era. People reported eerie, supernatural portents at the exact moment of his death. They said lightning struck the great dome of the Florence Cathedral, ghosts supposedly appeared, and the lions kept on Via Leon were said to be fighting one another in the streets.
And the empire he built? It began to fracture incredibly fast. Just 2 years after his death, in 1494, his heir, the rather aptly named Piero the Unfortunate, completely squandered his father's patrimony. The Medici dynasty was brought down and exiled from Florence. It wouldn't be until 1512 that Lorenzo's second son, Giovanni, who would later become Pope Leo X, finally managed to retake the city with the aid of a Spanish army.
So, what does this all mean for us today? It leaves us to ponder. Did Lorenzo the Magnificent build the Renaissance or merely buy it on borrowed time? He was an unparalleled visionary who championed the greatest artists in human history, yet he ruled through shadows and left behind a financially crippled bank. It's a fascinating, complex contradiction that completely defines his legacy. So, what do you take away from this? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning history.